So for the last 2 weeks, I've been going through what I call lessons from 2020. This is basically where I share kind of key lessons, key things that I learned from the 2020. 2020 was an interesting year to say the least, and in some ways, we're still catching the cold from last year's sneeze, so to speak. So in the last 2 weeks, as I just mentioned, I've been sharing key lessons that I've learned from 2020. Today, I'll be sharing the third key lesson that I learned from 2020, and this is the importance of leadership, or as I have titled it, Leadership Matters a Lot. Leadership matters a whole lot. So for me, this is kind of the third key lesson that I learned from 2020. Leadership matters a whole lot. So, and what I want to talk about today is the importance of how to lead through a crisis. Many of us will go through at least one major crisis in our life or several crises in our life. And what I want to do today is to empower you, to give you some tools to help you lead through those seasons. And as you know, 2020, the year a year that was marked by the pandemic and many other crises that people faced in 2020. And what today I'll be drawing from that and to empower you to be able to lead through whatever crisis that you will face in life. In normal times, a lot is at stake when leading. Whether you're a single person leading yourself, or whether you're leading a family, or whether you're leading a group of students, whether you're a teacher, or leading others in whatever capacity of leadership you are in, from a teacher to a principal to a pastor to a doctor, whatever leadership capacity you're in, a lot are at stake when you're leading, even in a normal time. However, everything that is at stake when leading intensifies or amplify, or it will intensify or even amplify when you're leading through a crisis. It's a lot at stake when you're leading, but when you're leading through a crisis, everything that is at stake amplifies. And today, I would like to teach you about six or so pillars that are important when leading through a crisis. Like I said, whether you're a parent or a single person leading yourself, whether you're a teacher or pastor, a CEO, whatever leadership responsibility you have, this lesson is going to be important to you. So if you're someone who takes notes, grab your notes. As we said here, we're going to give you some tools to help you make better life decisions so you can live with few regrets and enjoy everything that God has for you. So, what are the pillars or the tools that you need when leading through a crisis? The first is a clear vision. The first thing that you need when leading through a crisis is a clear vision. Because a crisis will bring with it chaos and confusion. So having a clear vision usually will be the difference between falling through the cracks or being engulfed by the chaos and the confusion that are brought by a crisis, or paving a way for yourself and the people that you lead. See, I'm reminded of a story in the Bible. There's an Old Testament character by the name of Nehemiah. Nehemiah lived in a time of crisis when his people were in a desperate need for some kind of redemption. They were under, foreign rulers who didn't favor them, and the structures that kind of kept the city safe were torn down. So when Nehemiah heard about this, he really wanted to make a difference. And I think the first thing that he said to the king, or his boss at that time, really showed what kind of clear vision and direction that Nehemiah had. So this is what Nehemiah said in Nehemiah 2:5. This is after some of his family members they've come to him, they've told him about everything happening, how chaotic things were back home. and he was looking so distraught when he went to work the next day, and his boss basically asked him, what's going on? Why you look so distressed? You don't look yourself, or you look sick. And Nehemiah told him what was going on, and the king asked him, so what do you want me to do? And this is what Nehemiah said, 2:5. Nehemiah chapter 2 verse 5. Then I told the king, sir, if it's all right with you, please send me back to Jerusalem so that I can rebuild the city where my ancestors are buried. Very, very clear vision. In a time of confusion and chaos, in a time of crisis, Nehemiah had a clear vision. His vision was to go back and rebuild the city where his ancestors were buried. And he went back, as the Bible tells us, he was able to rebuild the wall and was able to set foundation that other people later built on. But his vision couldn't be any clearer. I want to go back home and I want to rebuild my city. Clear vision. So that's the first thing that we need when leading through a crisis. We need a very, very clear vision. So whenever you're going through a crisis, whenever things are chaotic in your life, whenever there's a lot of confusion, you may want to take a breather, take a pause, and write down your vision. Because if your vision is not clear to you, if you're a husband and your vision is not clear to you, there's no way your vision is going to be clear to your wife. You see, if you're a wife, if your vision is not clear to you, there's no way your vision is going to be clear to your husband. If you are leading a company or a church, if your vision is not clear to you, there's no way it's going to be clear to the people that you lead. If you are a single person leading yourself and your vision is not clear to you, there's no way it's going to be clear to anyone that comes in your life. Whether it's friends or family members or boyfriend or girlfriend, whatever. If your vision is not first clear to you, it's going to be very difficult for anyone that comes into your life. That's why a lot of relationships end in chaos, because there's no vision, because the people in the relationship don't have a clear vision. You need a clear vision. Even when things are normal, you need a clear vision, but more so when things are in crisis, when things are chaotic and there's a lot of confusion, you need even a clearer vision. So that's the first pillar, the first tool that we need to lead in crisis, a clear vision. And here's the second one. We need a strong commitment. A strong commitment. If you're not committed to something, you will fall for anything. If you're not committed to something, you will fall for anything. In a crisis, if you're not committed to something, you will flee from everything. Let me say that again. If you're not committed to something, you will fall for anything. That's in normal time. In a crisis, if you're not committed to something, you will flee from everything. You need to be committed to something, to your vision, to your conviction, to your passion, to your faith, to your belief. In a crisis, you have to be grounded. You have to be committed to something, because if you don't have a commitment to something, you will flee from literally everything. I was watching an interview today with the CEO of Budweiser USA, and he was talking about how this year, for the first time in 37 years, Budweiser will not be putting a Super Bowl ad. And in this interview, and this is something he had mentioned in the past, they were trying to get from him why this year, why won't you be doing a Super Bowl commercial for the first time in 37 years? And from what I got from what he was saying was that we are committed to the American people more than making good beers and profit. And it was a lengthy interview, and you can go online and check it out. But one of the things that he did too in the beginning of the pandemic, he kind of switched from making beers to making hand sanitizers and other products that they used to supply the hospitals and other frontline workers. Because for him, he was committed to a vision much more bigger, much more important than making beers and making profit. He, in his words, committed to the people of North America. So because he was committed to the people of North America, when the crisis hit, when there was a global pandemic, he was able to still stay in his commitment. He was able to shift his core production from beers to hand sanitizers, but his commitment was still the same, which was to the people. And if you're not committed to something in a crisis, you will flee from everything. And a very good biblical example is Ruth. And Ruth is someone with, a good example of someone with strong conviction and a strong commitment in a crisis. So Ruth lost her husband, brother-in-law, father-in-law, and she literally lost all the important people in her life. And she had the opportunity to break free from whatever commitment she had with Naomi, because she didn't have any other commitments other than the fact that this is the family that I'm married to. And that happened in a time when the value of a woman was mainly determined by the men in her life. And all the key men in her life have died. So she had the opportunity to really break away and just do something else and start a new life, but instead she chose her commitment over her comfort. What are you committed to? If you find yourself in a crisis, what are you anchored to? What are you grounded in? What is your strong conviction that drives you? What do you wake up to every morning and say, because of this, I'm going to get up, I'm going to keep going because I'm committed to something that is much more bigger than myself, much more bigger than my comfort. I'm committed and I have a strong conviction. What are you committed to? A few years ago, my in-laws came to visit and we were in church. Our lead pastor, Pastor Kyle, was preaching about marriage. And he was talking about some of the key ingredients in marriage, and he mentioned commitment. And my mother-in-law, who sat next to me, turned to me and said, Evie, if I were preaching this message, I would say 3 things you need in the marriage: commitment, commitment, and commitment. And she and I chuckled about it, but after church, we came home and we're talking, and she was, and because her and my father-in-law, they've been together for 30-some years. And she was talking about the importance of commitment in a marriage, that there are times when you won't feel the love, you won't feel anything else, but the thing that grounds you in the marriage, the things that holds you, the conviction, is the commitment to your spouse, commitment to the vows that you've taken, and commitment to God. And that's why when marriages go through crisis, commitment is what usually brings them through. Commitment to God, to their vows, and to their spouses. And if you're a single person, when you go through tough times in life, the reason why some people don't quit college, because they're committed to a future that is bigger than whatever trials or crises they're going through. That's why some people endure. That's why some people have grit more than others, because they are driven by their strong commitment and conviction. In a crisis, you need to be committed to something much more bigger than yourself. So, a clear vision, a strong commitment, and this is what Ruth said about having a strong commitment. This is Ruth chapter 1, verses 16 to 17. She said, I will go where you go. I will live where you live, where your people will be. I will be with you. Your God will be my God. I will die where you die and be buried beside you. May God punish me if we're ever separated, even by death. Wow. What strong words of commitment from a woman who lived thousands of years ago. What are you committed to? What is your strong conviction that drives you? And here's the third tool when leading through a crisis: consistency. Consistency is so important because it is the thing that keeping us from moving on to the next flashy new thing. Leaders who are consistent will last in the long run. Leaders who are consistent, whether you're leading yourself as a single person, whether you're leading your family, whether you live in a company or a church, whatever you're leading, leaders who are consistent will last in the long run. That doesn't mean you will always get it right. It doesn't mean you get it right most of the time. However, you're consistent in whatever you do. Because things don't usually happen overnight. Sometimes it takes a while for things to happen, but consistency, trusting in the process of being consistent with whatever you do is what will eventually get you the result. A few years ago, well, actually, let me give you a more recent example. I was listening to a podcast by Patrick Lencioni, who's a kind of a leadership guru. Not kind of, he's a leadership guru, a coach, and he was talking about the CEO of Southwest Airlines, how he's been in meetings with him. He's known him over a decade. He said, I will be in a meeting with him, and I will hear him say something, and I will not see him for 3 years, and I'll be in another meeting with him, and he'll be saying the very same thing that he said 3 years ago. And 2 years from then, he'll be saying the exact same thing. That is the definition of consistency. You keep at it, and when you feel like quitting, you keep at it even some more. Consistency. It's a very key ingredient when leading through a crisis, because a crisis brings a lot of, like I said, a lot of chaos and a lot of confusion and a lot of shakiness. So you need consistency. People that you lead need consistency. When we become flaky and when we become shaky, we lose credibility with ourselves and with other people. That's why we need to be consistent. And if you're living through a crisis and you realize you're doing something that is wrong, you're not just consistent to a result, you're consistent to something that is bigger than the result, perhaps a process. And it's okay to say, hey, I'm consistent with growth. I'm consistent in terms of making sure that we're growing. And if we're doing something that is not right, it's okay to say, let's switch systems, let's switch process to something else that will help us grow. And it's okay to do that. But you need to be consistent. And here's the other tool. On top of consistency, we need courage. That is the ability to do something that frightens the heck out of you. AKA, doing it afraid. Last year, I preached a message that I titled "Do It Afraid." You can go back and you can feel free to watch. You can go back and watch it. But doing something that frightens you, courage, is one of the best tools that any person can have in their toolbox, especially for a leader, especially in a time of crisis. Courage. And I'm reminded of the early church. The early church faced a lot of threats from all angles, from within the Jewish community and from outside in the Greco-Roman community. They faced so many crises, so many threats of extinction. But they decided, and a clear example was when Peter and James were whipped and beaten, and they had the opportunity to say, well, we're done with this because we've suffered too much. But they told the Pharisees that it doesn't matter what you do to us, we will still continue to preach this gospel. Was it scary? Absolutely. Could it have cost them their lives? Absolutely. In fact, it cost them their lives. But they did it afraid. They did it anyways because they had the courage to do it. The courage, that's the difference between doing something when you're afraid and running from something because it frightens you. Courage is what makes you do the right thing even when other people are telling you to do otherwise. Courage is what made the civil rights leaders in the 60s stand up and speak up. Courage is what made someone like MLK give one of the greatest speeches in history about having a dream. Courage is what made people had what they call civil rights protests, the sit-ins, the sitting in the bus and refusing to move. Courage. That was what the civil rights leaders had when they marched and were hosed down and dogs were unleashed on them. They still marched on because they had courage. Courage is what you need. It's what you will need to be in a relationship, even when there are other things that looks flashy out there. And I shared with you the story of commitment that my mother-in-law shared with me about 3-4 years ago. And when you add courage to that, that's a key ingredient for leading through any crisis. So, let me just go through this quickly. I said the tools we need to lead through crisis. We need a clear vision, and then we need strong commitment. We need consistency. We need courage. That is the ability to do things that frighten you. And the next one is constraints. So when people think of constraints, they think of limitations. They think of making you I think of inability, but constraints are really, really good. At one of the largest churches in America, one of their values, you hear a lot of people say think outside the box, but one of their values was we think within the box. Constraints. Because what you decide not to do is even more powerful than what you decide to do. Let me say that again. What you decide not to do is even more powerful than what you decide to do. And Proverbs says it this way: a person without constraints is like a city with no walls. You have nothing to protect you. When people think of constraints, they think of protecting. Constraints are what protect you from invasion. But no, constraints is what protects you from eviction. It protects you from going outside of the boundaries that you've set for yourself. When in crisis, you need to determine what you're not going to do. And let me give you a simple tip. Every night before you go to bed, write down the things you're going to do the next day and the things that you're not going to do the next day. Because what you decide not to do is more powerful than what you decide to do. Constraints. What are your limitations? What boundaries have you set for yourself? What boundaries have you set to protect yourself from getting into things or doing things that would not benefit you or benefit the people that you lead? When in crisis, constraints will prevent you from making irrational and God's decision that will lead you and other people astray. And here's the final thing. Compassion. This is leading with your heart, not just your head. This is doing things with your heart, not just your head. And I could not think of any better example than Jesus. So as a church, we're in what we call the year of the Bible and prayer, and we're reading through the New Testament this year. By the way, whether you're a part of Spring Valley Church or not, we invite you to come to read through the Bible with us. And we've been going through this since the beginning of the year. If you've not started yet, it's not too late. You can join today and you can read the New Testament with us. It's really, really exciting. And if you read the New Testament several times, almost every chapter or so, you will hear this phrase, and Jesus had compassion on the people. There's no leader that exemplifies compassion than Jesus. This is leading with your heart. This is empathy. This is when you put yourself in people's shoes and walk the mile with them. This is when you refuse to send them away but instead take care of the situation yourself. Compassion. You see, a leader without compassion is nothing but a tool. A leader without compassion, a person basically without compassion, is nothing but a tool. If you don't have compassion for yourself and for other people that you work with or lead, you're nothing but a tool. So if you don't have compassion, I will encourage you to develop it. And like a muscle, compassion is something that you can develop. It's something that you can grow. I remember a few years ago, I took one of these tests, this personality test, the DISC test, and my empathy, because of the work that I do, how I'm so intense, with doing some stuff, my empathy came back like 0. And I was so distraught by that, right? I'm like, golly, like, I'm a pastor, I should have more empathy. And I do, but it doesn't really translate much in my work. And I took some time to pray about this. I took some coaching, and slowly I can tell the difference that how my empathy have grown in the last probably 5-6 years, or 3-4 years basically. But you need to develop that muscle. And like I said, Jesus, more than anybody else, exemplify what it means to have compassion. And I think Jesus' ultimate compassion is his death on the cross for all humanity, for all of us to benefit from a relationship with God. He showed the ultimate compassion by dying on the cross. And I want to pause right now. And like I mentioned, he died on the cross so you can have a relationship with God. That's the ultimate compassion. And if you're watching this right now and you're like, wow, that's great, I don't have the relationship with God, I want to take a minute to invite you to that. If you just take a minute and just say this prayer with me, wherever you are, there's no shame, just say this prayer with me. Jesus, I welcome you into my life. I embrace your compassion. I make you my Lord and my Savior. From this day forward, I choose to serve you. Amen. If you just said that prayer for the first time, congratulations. Welcome to the God family. Do me a favor. There's a number in the chat. Just text the word, accepted to that number that is in the chat. It's a 77. I think it's a 484 number. 484-997-7147. We will reach out to you. We'll get you connected with group of people that can help you grow and help you develop in your relationship with God. So just a quick summary before we go. I said there are about 6 things that you need to lead through a crisis. I said one of the lesson for today basically is that leadership matters a lot in a crisis. And I said there are tools or pillars that you need when leading through a crisis. You need a clear vision. Number 1. Number 2, you need a strong commitment. Number 3, you need consistency. Number 4, you need courage. Number 5, you need constraints. And number 6, you need compassion. I'm so glad that you were able to join us today. Do me a favor, share this message on your page. Text it to a friend, because I believe this will help people to make better life decisions so they can live with fewer regrets. I love you, and I cannot wait to see you next Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. God bless you, and have a wonderful rest of your day.